Hello, everyone, and welcome to Mountain Lake Journal. I'm Tom Halleck. This week, we're sitting down with three of the journalists who cover the news in northern New York to talk about this week's Republican and Democratic primaries for the candidates hoping to get on the November ballot in the race for the open seat in Congress in New York's 21st District. Joining us this week, Pat Bradley, who is the North Country Bureau Chief for WAMC Northeast Public Radio, Kara Chapman, who is the Champlain Valley reporter for North Country Public Radio, and Alec Lasham, who is the Plattsburgh Bureau Chief for WCAX Television. Welcome to you all.
Hi, Tom.
Hi, Tom.
Let's begin with the primaries this week. Blake Gendebien and Anthony Constantino winning the Democratic and Republican nominations. Gendebien by about a 2-to-1 margin over Stuart Amaral, while the Republican primary was a bit closer. But Anthony Constantino still getting nearly 60% of the votes over Assemblyman Robert Smullen. You covered the candidates, you've covered the races for months. Any surprises from primary night?
In the Democratic primary, I would say no. In the Republican primary, perhaps the margin of victory that Constantino pulled out over Smullen. I think some people may have expected it to be a little closer.
Perhaps. I kind of went into this election night thinking it could go either way for both sides. You know, primaries, they're a different animal. You have lower turnout. It's really the most dedicated, sometimes the kind of farthest right or farthest left voters who show up. And so, you know, turnout reflected that. Like, you know, Blake Gendebien had name recognition going into the night. He's been campaigning for 18 months, so it kind of made sense that he came out on top. With Constantino and Smullen, I felt like it could have gone either way, and, you know, apparently the President Donald Trump's endorsement really played a big role in this race.
It certainly answered one of the biggest questions, whether President Trump's endorsement would be a big boost to Anthony Constantino, and it certainly seems to have made a difference.
And with turnout as well, you know, with last night, the primary, I mean, that was some of the highest turnout they've seen in a congressional primary, at least in the Tri-County, Franklin, Essex, Clinton, in quite some time. And I think the other thing that stood out as well is the number of votes that Constantino not only got over Robert Smullen, but more votes altogether than Gendebien had got or the Democrats had got on that side. So it shows for Republicans turning out just how enthusiastic they were in this election.
In the Democratic primary, the total number of primary votes was just over 24,000, and that's with 126,000 total registered Democratic voters in the district. In the GOP contest, the total number of votes that the Board of Elections cites for the primary is just over 45,000, and that's out of a total of 205,000 registered Republicans in New York 21.
We're taping midweek, the day after the primary, so the unresolved question as of right now is whether Robert Smullen, after his loss in the Republican primary, will reevaluate whether he stays in the race and runs on the Conservative Party line. He's already won their nomination. He's on the ballot in November, so the question now for Smullen, does he stay on the ballot in November or does he step down? And we don't know. He said in his concession speech last night that it's something he's going to assess over the next few days, but he really didn't give any indication.
He's going to be under a lot of pressure, I think, from the MAGA and Trump supportive GOP sector of, the Republican Party. Smullen was endorsed by all of the GOP or most of the GOP local committees. So I don't know how much of a rift you're going to see there if they're going to say, you got to stay on the conservative ballot because you represent what we're trying to represent in the district, versus the pressure to pull out because the national Republicans are not going to want to lose a Republican seat in Congress.
Right, and what's interesting is that after the results came in last night, we finally heard from Congresswoman Stefanik. She had declined to endorse in this race, and she came out, congratulated Constantino, said he'd be a strong representative in the district. And someone else who has also, kind of gotten on board with the Constantino train is State GOP Chair Ed Cox, who had endorsed Smullen. Now, I saw this afternoon. He says, we're ready, the voters have spoken, we're ready to work with Anthony. So that's kind of an interesting shift that we've seen, because the state GOP doesn't normally endorse in races like this, and they did support Smullen. So now they're switching gears to align with the voters.
So that's interesting. There could be pressure from Ed Cox and other top Republicans for Smullen to drop out. They do not want a three-way race going into November, where you have Smullen and Constantino against Gendebien, because that sets up a possible repeat of what we saw 17 years ago, back in 2009, when Bill Owens won the seat, because there was a Conservative Party candidate, Doug Hoffman. There was a Republican candidate, Dee Dee Skuzapava, Assemblywoman at the time, and those two split enough votes that it allowed Bill Owens to win by a slim margin, but he won.
Yeah, he was the first Democrat to represent the region since the Civil War. That's
200
that's
years.
a long time.
Exactly. So they do not want a repeat of that.
Well, not only a repeat for the district, but as I mentioned before, the fact that the U.S. House, is so close to having Democrats take it over. The GOP cannot afford to lose any district they currently have.
So, for Smullen, it really doesn't have much time. We're talking maybe 10 days in that time frame for him to file something with the state and withdraw his name from the ballot. But does he think that he wants to double down in November and maybe take his chance with more voters at large? Because again, as Kara was saying, in the primaries, you have the more dedicated party voters that are on the furthest side that they can be. So I think for him, he'll have a lot to think about and weigh that. But I'm sure 2009 is definitely top of mind. And
we heard about Ed Cox. Do you think there will be a number of Republicans now basically saying, ultimately, drop out, Bob? We can't have two right-of-center candidates running in November.
There's going to be a lot of pressure, not just on Smullen, but on the individual committees that supported him. And as you guys mentioned, these are primaries, and you can only vote in a primary if you are a member of the party. So as we go into the general election, they now have to worry about unaffiliated and independent voters and which way they will go. And they could also split that GOP vote that they need so much even more.
And those are some of the many voters that Gendebien would be counting on, almost every single Democrat, but trying to appeal to those independent voters, those moderate voters, to see if he could win some of them over.
And I think that's kind of what he's been setting up with his, what is it called, the lower cost now independent party line that he's secured.
Yep.
He's told me that that's kind of his philosophy, to show that it's not about party, it's about people. Whether that is effective obviously remains to be seen. We don't tend to see a lot of votes going to independent lines. Like last time when Matt Castelli ran on the independent moderate line against Stefanik, I think it only got him, I don't want to say numbers, but it got him a very small percentage, and she still won by double-digit margins. So whether that strategy will be effective remains to be seen.
And with a candidate like Constantino, too, I'm curious that if Smullen does decide to drop out and he doesn't run in November, do we automatically assume that all those voters are going to go to Constantino? I don't really know how those Republican voters are going to be feeling about Constantino, who again is by far the most different candidate we've had, I guess, here in the 21st District. Very different than Stefanik, more Trumpian, borrowing more of those qualities. Do they automatically go? Do they pick party over the candidate, or do they still want to find something more moderate and go over to Gendebien?
Or do they sit it out?
That as well, yeah.
Constantino said he would spend what he had to in order to win this race. He ended up spending quite a bit, in the ballpark of $7 million. Blanketing the airways with TV ads for months, billboards. As he said, will he continue to finance this campaign on his own, or will he now possibly accept donations from Republican friendly donors? Is he still holding the line on that it's going to be him and him alone financing his campaign?
I mean, I've never explicitly asked him that, but one of his slogans is "Nobody's man but yours." So that leads me to believe that he might maintain that independence. He also, when I interviewed him when he stopped by here a few weeks ago, he was saying he doesn't like to take, loans and money from other people. He doesn't like being beholden to other people in that way. So it wouldn't surprise me if he continues to self-fund and just tries to engage voters directly as like just an "I'm here for you" type of candidate.
President Trump did a video for him just a few days ago, a last-minute boost. The question now, will the president's endorsement appeal to a broader range of voters? And you were just talking about this a couple of minutes ago, Pat, beyond the loyal primary voters when it comes to the general election in November. Will Trump's backing continue to be a big factor? And that will be something that we'll have to see if his appeal goes out to more voters other than just the primary voters.
Yeah, it could also be a negative for people who don't like President Trump, and some people are expecting a so-called blue wave this fall, and if they determine that we've got a Trump-endorsed candidate, I don't like that, I'm going out to vote against him. Regardless of who the Democrat is, I'm just going to vote against this Trump-endorsed person. So there's all of those factors, too, that will play in to what happens in November.
I think at the end of the day, though, we talk about who will decide this election. We've already talked about how registered voters in this district, 2-1 Republicans and Democrats. I think ultimately it's going to come down to the independents. How happy are they with the president's agenda over the past 2.5 years now? And if they're not happy, maybe they turn out for Democrats, or as Pat was saying, maybe they stay home or they vote Republican. But I don't think for either party, or especially Democrats, I don't think we're going to see more Democrats come out and win this election, because there's just simply not enough of them that are registered at this point in the district.
Alec, Kara, Pat, thank you very much for taking the time to join us. We appreciate it.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Tom.
Tom.